Well, hello, Stacey Murphy here, known to many as Brooklyn's Backyard Farmer, and it is my passion to remove any obstacles that stand between you and a successful vegetable and herb garden. And that includes harvesting all of that fresh food so that you can really savor all of the nourishment of those homegrown organic vegetables. And I'm guessing you're probably a lot like me. You probably enjoy knowing exactly where your food is coming from, growing inexpensive organic vegetables right in your backyard without any toxins. Now, it's one thing to grow all of that food, but I know that you probably want to make the most out of your garden, and I would love for you to take full advantage of every morsel that you harvest. And speaking of harvesting, did you know that most successful growers spend 40% of their time harvesting? So that means you can significantly reduce your efforts gardening if you know how to harvest efficiently. And part of knowing how to harvest efficiently is to learn how to be ready to cook, prepare, and preserve all that food. Now, I've taught hundreds of teens in Brooklyn how to cook and prepare food straight from the garden. And what we all learned in the process is that cooking from the garden can be a little different than picking up groceries at the supermarket or farmer's market. While it's different, it's not that hard to master. You can do this. So I know you're going to be eating fresh out of your garden this season, right? That's the best part about gardening. But what's the second best thing about gardening? The next best thing to eating freshly harvested vegetables and herbs is savoring the taste of your garden even though it's winter outside. So when you preserve some of your garden harvest for later, you don't have to buy pasta sauce or salsa in the winter. That's how you take full advantage of your garden. And recently I asked you what vegetables and herbs you're growing the most of and what questions you have related to cooking and preserving that food. And I asked because I'm creating an online course and I didn't want to leave anything out. And I received over 400 questions about canning, drying, freezing, storing, cooking, and fermenting fresh vegetables. So in this quick video, I'm going to tackle a couple of the most popular questions. Before I do, I want to point out that below this video is your downloadable guide to food preservation, to preserving all of those fresh vegetables coming out of your garden. So what are the different methods? What are the advantages and disadvantages of each? Which vegetables prefer which method? And so for those of you where, if this is a new concept to you, this is an overview of what to do with that harvest and how to preserve it. So go ahead, grab your download and let's get started. Now, like I mentioned, I've received a lot of questions from you about the best way to harvest, prepare, and preserve all those vegetables and herbs coming out of your garden. And certain crops came up again and again. The top three: tomatoes, squash, and beans. For instance, this question: I have tons of tomatoes. What's the best way to can them quickly? First of all, that is an awesome problem to have, right? But I also know it's frustrating because it's just too much garden awesomeness all at once. So what if you didn't have to can all those tomatoes right away to preserve them? What if there was a shortcut? So did you know you can freeze tomatoes and they store for at least 3 to 4 months? And freezing is a fast method to preserve all those tomatoes. This is one shortcut that could save you hours of time over a hot stove in the peak of summer. And you could pull those tomatoes out of the freezer whenever you want to make soup or pasta sauce later. You can even can them later when you have more time if you need to recover that freezer space. So that's the tricky part about freezing your harvest. You do have to have freezer space and the power to keep the freezer cool. Plus, you have to know how to freeze vegetables properly, and there's a lot of misinformation about freezing on the internet. So I'm going to show you how to properly freeze your vegetables step by step in this video so your vegetables retain their flavor, texture, and nutrients. And I know this is on your mind because I also received several questions about how to keep frozen green beans from being mushy and tasteless. And I love this question. Is there anything I can just chop and freeze? And I get it. You're looking for fast and easy, right? So I have some good news and some bad news. Yes, there are 2 vegetables you can just chop and freeze, but the rest take one extra step. But don't worry, that extra step isn't too difficult and it doesn't take too much time. So remember, freezing is just one way to store your garden vegetables for later, and don't forget to grab your guide to preserving the harvest below this video so you can see all the ways to store your food for later, as well as all the advantages and disadvantages of each method. So here's all the reasons why you might want to freeze your harvest as your method for storage. So most vegetables can be frozen, almost everything coming out of your garden. And there's only 5 vegetables that really don't like to be frozen. They lose their flavor, they lose their texture, and those are radish, cucumber, lettuce, cabbage, and celery. For every other vegetable, there's a way to make sure that you retain color, flavor, and nutrient value, which is really great news, right? And with freezing, you're retaining the texture of that vegetable as well. You can chop it and freeze it versus when you're canning and you're basically mushing it up. So you can retain some texture of your vegetables. And it takes less time than, say, drying, canning, and fermenting. It happens pretty quickly. And these are simple procedures that you can do with household items. I basically went into my kitchen and just used whatever was there. And chopping and freezing a whole bunch of your harvest all at once can really reduce the amount of prep time that you do for future meals. So you can chop and freeze a week's worth of meals in less time than it would take you to do all of that individually, because you're batching it and you're doing it all at once. So it's pretty convenient. And then also you can create little serving size packets in your freezer so that you just pull out what you need for each meal. Now, some of the reasons why you may not want to freeze your harvest. There are costs involved with freezing. You have to be able to power your freezer, right? If it's not solar powered. And then the other thing is that freezer space. If you have a big family, you might not have enough freezer space in order to store all that garden harvest. And the other disadvantage of freezing is that if you freeze your vegetables incorrectly, you can actually speed up the loss of texture, flavor, and nutrients and make your food really unappetizing. And you don't want mushy, tasteless beans, right? That's why it's important to watch this video to see if this is the right method for you to store your food. Okay, so let's dive into freezing our garden vegetables. I said you could just chop and freeze 2 vegetables. What are they? Well, one of them is something that a lot of backyard gardeners grow a lot of. Peppers. So you can just chop and freeze hot peppers and sweet peppers. But the other item, the other vegetable, is something you don't generally see too many household gardeners grow because it takes a lot of time to fully mature, and that's onions. Plus, you can just chop and freeze mushrooms if you grow a ton of those, but that's not a vegetable. So that's a different story. All right, so if you're chopping and freezing peppers, onions, or mushrooms, here's what you do. Wash the vegetables with clean water. Let them dry completely. And when you're freezing, you don't want to add any additional water that could form ice crystals. Water is kind of the enemy in the freezing process. So chop them into any size you want. You can dice them or you can chop them into thin slices, depending on what your meal plan is for them. If you want to create salsa later or soup or stir fry. And then basically you put them in a food-safe freezer bag. I'll talk more about the types of bags later in this video. Remove all the air from the bag and seal it. Mark the date on your bag. Peppers and onions are going to store for months this way. Okay, so what about all those other vegetables? Well, to answer that, you have to understand just one tiny bit of biology. Plants are still alive even after they are harvested, and they are continuing all their functions to try to stay alive. So what's happening is that there are enzymes in the plant which occur naturally, and they are part of the natural aging process. So what happens is those enzymes start to break down the plant, and these reactions they lead to discoloration of the fruit and eventually spoilage. So bruising can also trigger these enzymatic reactions to speed up, which is why we only use the highest quality vegetables and remove any bruises as well as the stems and end of the vegetables before we do any preservation. All right, so what stops this process from happening so that we can store food and it will last instead of breaking down? Well, it's a process called blanching. It's really just a fancy name for heating up in boiling water for a certain amount of time and then quenching those vegetables in an ice bath for the same amount of time and then storing it in the freezer. So let's head to the kitchen and I'll show you how it's done. It's really important that you get it right because if you under blanch your vegetables for too little amount of time, you're going to increase the enzymes that break down your food and then you're going to lose your texture, flavor, and nutrients. If you over blanch your vegetables, you're going to lose texture. So what you want to do is make sure you reference tables and find out exactly how much time you need to blanch your specific vegetables before you freeze them. You want to make sure you choose the highest quality vegetables that you're going to freeze. So I'm removing any beans that have blemishes on them or if they have any insect chew marks on them, and I'm doing this as I go. And here I've already washed my beans multiple times. You don't want to soak your vegetables. You want to wash them in small batches and replace the water to ensure your food is clean before you preserve it. Now, in this case, I've decided to chop my greens because I'll most likely use them for a soup or I might saute them up in a little pan. And you can freeze them whole if you're going to make sauteed green beans later. This is the benefit of freezing is that you get to decide what your food looks like. It's completely prepped for you to cook later. And regardless of whether I chop or leave these green beans whole, what I necessarily do want to do is I want to remove both of the ends first. I want to get rid of the bits that I don't want to cook. And beans are a bit of pain in the butt because they require a little bit of finessing to line up all the beans, cut off the ends on the tops and the bottoms. But once you do this, the rest is really fast. And you can remove the top and bottom from each individual bean, but I find this method just a little bit faster to process multiple beans at the same time. Now, it looks like I have 2 cups of green beans, but I want to measure to make sure. And I'm measuring because I want to find out how much water I need to blanch these beans. And 1 gallon of water is needed per 1 pound of vegetables. And what I know about my green beans, 2 cups of green beans weighs approximately 12 ounces, which is about 1/3 of a pound. And that means I need 1/3 of a gallon, which is 12 cups of water. And double check your quantities always, and I know not everybody is on the same measurement system, so just make sure that you double check all those quantities when you're getting started. Okay, so I need to get my water up to a good rolling boil, and generally you want to blanch in small quantities. 1 to 2 cups is a good amount. And if you knew how big each of your batches was going to be ahead of time, you could have started to heat up your water while you were washing and chopping your vegetables, and that would save you some time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my vegetables in the wire blanching basket, or in this case my steamer basket, because that's what I had available. And you want to use whatever you have handy, and you want to be ready to go for when that water is at a rolling boil. So now that that water is at a rolling boil, and you really want it boiling really good, because when you drop in your green beans and that basket, you want the water to return to boiling within a minute. So what you want to do is make sure that you see the water come back to that rolling boil within that minute, and then you're going to set a timer with your blanching time. And here I'm setting for 3 minutes as I have medium-sized green beans, and there are tables that you can check to find out how much time is needed for your particular vegetable. Now, I want to have my ice water bath ready. So basically I'm going to take, when these are done, I'm going to take and plunge them into ice water. So I want that to be ready so that when the beans are done in 3 minutes, I can do that immediately. And here, because I'm using a steamer basket and I don't have another container big enough to create an ice bath to dip that steamer basket into once I'm done, I'm going to use a second small colander to dump the beans into for that secondary process. So when my timer goes off, I immediately remove the steaming basket from the boiling water. I'm going to shake off as much hot water as possible. That's going to help ensure that these cool down quickly. And you don't want to spend a lot of time here, but shake off as much hot water as you can. And then I pour the green beans into my cooling colander and my ice bath. And I'm going to set another timer because basically I want this second process, this cooling process, to be the same amount of time as the blanching. So in this case, that is 3 minutes. And I'm going to replace my steamer basket into the boiling water to keep it hot. And this is where I could start to do another batch now if I wanted. That's the benefit of having these separate hot and cold steamer baskets the way that I've set them up, is you can do multiple rounds as you're going. Now, back to my cold bath, I make sure that all my green beans are really submerged in that ice bath so they are cooling off quickly and evenly. All of them are cooling off evenly. And after my 3 minutes is up, I'm going to lift the beans out. I'm going to shake off as much water as possible. And this is very important because any excess water can cause ice crystals in the freezer. So I'm shaking as much as I can off. And because I have a colander and not a basket, I need to shake off excess moisture each time I pour a little bit out. And this is where a basket would come in very handy, but I'm doing the best with what I have. Now, you could put these green beans directly into a container, but what I found is that laying them out on trays is the way that they freeze very evenly and individually, so it makes it easier to use later. And it freezes more quickly, which really retains the best freshness, I find. So I spread the beans out evenly on the tray, and look how green and still fresh looking they are. Then I'm going to slide this tray into the freezer for 1 hour. I set a timer so I don't forget. And after an hour, the green beans are ready to be put into freezer-safe containers. You want to make sure there's no air in the bag. So I prefer to use glass jars whenever I can, but in this case, there would just be too much air in the jar for that purpose, and so I'm using a plastic bag. And what I'm looking for in that bag is that it's food safe, moisture and vapor resistant, durable, leak proof, resistant to brittleness and cracking at low temperatures, and also resistant to oil, grease, and water in case anything strange happens in your freezer. All of that is what protects my food from absorption of off flavors or odors in the freezer. And this bag is also easy to seal, and I can mark it with a Sharpie with the date so I know when I put it in the freezer. I wouldn't recommend anything larger than a half-gallon bag for freshness reasons. Now remember, the fluctuations in your freezer temperature can cause ice crystals, freezer burn, and deterioration of your food. So you want to make sure your freezer stays at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which is well below freezing. And if you do see ice crystals or freezer burn on your food, these are just quality issues. The food is still safe to eat. It may just be a little bit different in texture or flavor. It may not be as appetizing. And after watching this video, I hope you learned a couple new tricks for how to really enjoy and savor your harvest. But right now I want to learn more about you. So after watching this video, what methods of preservation might you try this season? And what might a dream garden menu look like for you? So post those comments below this video. And I'm human, I like to be liked, so give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. And more importantly, if you know of a new grower, please share this video with them so that they can enjoy their harvest as well. Because these techniques can ensure that everything you harvest becomes food and medicine for your well-being. And I would love that kind of nourishment for everyone with a vegetable and herb garden. And while it can be enjoyable to cook and preserve all this food, there are tricks and shortcuts to make it fast and efficient for when you're in a hurry. And I'll be sharing all my best secrets for my garden harvest and storage system in my upcoming class. I can't wait to share it with you. Because once you start, I promise, you're going to be hooked. Just like all the teens and adults I worked with in Brooklyn. There are so many ways to enjoy the garden. You know, it just doesn't get any better than this. And I would love this for you. So don't forget, share your comments below. And I'll see you in a couple days with more answers to your awesome questions. In the next video, I'm going to talk all about summer squash and zucchini. And I'm also going to show some of my favorite recipes and preservation techniques for that very abundant vegetable. So right now I'm going to go enjoy my zucchini fritters, and I'll see you soon with the recipe.